Hey guys, welcome to the ITS Knot of the Week in HD. Today we're going to be talking about the figure-8 and some variations. So we've got the standard figure-8, which I'll be teaching you how to tie first. Then we'll go through figure-8 on a bight, a double figure-8 on a bight, and also a threaded figure-8. So let's get into it. Okay, on the figure-8 we're going to start walking through the basic configuration of how to tie a figure-8 first, and then we'll get into the other variations. So first off, I just wanted to mention that this is blue water assault line. This is the kind of standard and rappelling line. It's used by the military as well as a lot of climbers because it's readily available even to civilians. So this is a static rope, and what's meant by that, and I think it's important since the knots we're going to be talking about today with figure-8s are largely climbing knots, is static line doesn't have any give to it. So if you're rappelling, you want static line because there's not going to be any bounce to the line versus a dynamic rope, which you'd want if you were actually doing lead climbing. In case of a fall, you would have some flex there to help break your fall. So real quick, that was a brief intro on static versus dynamic line. So with the figure-8, what you're going to want to do is create a bight in the rope, and you're going to go around and cross over the top, or the standing part of the rope. You're going to come around the back and then back through that original bight. And that is the standard figure-8. So with variations of this, and the common usage, or one of the common usages for a figure-8, is to join two lines of equal thickness. So I've got a secondary line here. This is just the opposite end of the 150-foot section of the blue water static line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tie, first off, a figure-8 here, create my bight, and trace back through. So there's the figure-8 here. I'm just going to pull that to the middle. What we're going to do with the opposite end is we're going to trace. So I'm going to thread it back through. So where the working end exited, which is here, I'm going to start tracing back through with the working end from the other line. So I'm going to give myself plenty of slack here, and I'll explain why here in a minute. I'm going to pull this back out real quick. Come back through this way. All right, so threading it back through. We're going to trace back around. You can see that that comes under this line. And all I'm trying to do is create a pattern here, so you can start to see this forming. Okay, so now what we've done, again, this was our working end from this side, this is our working end from this side, and now we've got them joined together with a figure-8 in the middle. And what we're going to do now, just to make sure that this joint is secure, is I'm going to back up each side. So what I'm going to use is essentially the fisherman's knot, or double fisherman's knot. So let me start that again just so you can see that, in case you're not familiar with that. So I'm going to go over the standing part, cross over, creating kind of an 8 itself, or an X in the line. Then I'm going to come back through and under everything there. And what this is doing is backing up the knot so that if this slips, the knot will act as a stopper to keep it from backing up through. So again, on this side, same thing. As you can see, this static line is pretty thick of a line. It's a little difficult to work with rather than some smaller lines, so something to take into consideration. And there is our two backed up working ends. All right, so now we're going to take a look at a figure-8 on a bight. So I've got a bight of line, and this can be at any point along a line. This is what's great about a figure-8 on a bight. And I'm going to take that same pattern as before, around the standing part, around and back through. So this, again, is a figure-8 on a bight. And one thing that I want to mention too with a figure-8 is that one of the reasons it's used in climbing is that it's very easy to check and to notice a mistake in a figure-8. So that's one of the reasons I prefer them in climbing too. Now, while the figure-8 on a bight is useful There's also specific applications that it's for and specific applications that I feel like it's not for. So what's great about this is you could have a line and you could tie one of these anywhere onto a line to create an anchor point at any point in the line, or to hook up anything to lower to somebody or something along those lines. So if you're going to clip into a harness, and I have a harness here, if you're going to clip into one, normally you would have a lead carabiner in here on your harness. Get this in here. So again, when I clip into a harness too, I like to clip into both loops versus the loop that's already there in a harness. That's just kind of my way of doing things. So again, if you were clipping into this harness, this is great, and now you've got a fixed anchor point into the line. But one of my issues with this is that there may be situations where you have to tie in directly to the harness. So what we're going to do is, now that you've seen the figure-8 on a Bight, I'm going to show you real quick the threaded figure-8 and how to attach that to a harness. Okay, so with a threaded figure-8, it's very similar to what we showed in terms of joining two lines together. So you're going to actually thread it back through once you have it tied. So I'm going to go ahead and get myself a fairly good section of working end here, and I'm going to tie the first figure-8 up here. So I've got a long tail, so to speak. So there's my figure-8. So what I'm going to do too, instead of having that figure-8 on a Bight that I could clip into a harness, let's say I needed to tie directly into the harness. So now I can take my working end, I can pass it through the harness like this, and I can start to work my threaded figure-8 in this fashion. So I would tighten this up here. And this is great too for top roping and things like that, because you can easily untie the threaded portion and leave the figure-8 in the line, so you know exactly where to hook up the next person to if you're tying in like that. And that's the way I'm used to doing things when I'm setting up a top rope. So again, we're going to thread here. And just tracing this pattern back around. And finishing that up like this. So one thing too, and you saw me kind of work my way back through here, you want to try to make sure that this is as flat as possible before you tighten that up. That will help with not only untying it, but it'll also visually you'll be able to tell that it's tied correctly. So again, if this was attached to a harness, I would absolutely back this up. So again, that same method we used before. And that would be properly attached to a harness. Okay, so now let's talk about a double figure-8 on a Bight. As you can see, I've got a pretty long section of rope here, and what I'm going to do is start with a huge loop there, or a huge bight, and I'm going to start tying my figure-8. You can see the tail that I have here, the loop that's created, is fairly large. And the purpose of that is, now that I have my figure-8, I'm actually going to loosen this side up and create some space. I'm going to come back through with the bight, creating this type of shape here. And once I have this, I'm going to start to tighten this up, and I'm going to take that loop that's created and I'm going to come around over the top of those two loops, or those two bights. So I'm going to flip this over because it's a little visually easier to see from this side. So what I'm going to do too now is that I've got these ears, and those ears are basically creating anchor points. So as I start to tighten these up here, and I can start to equalize them, as you can see, as I pull different ends of this rope, they'll start to equalize. Now I'll tighten everything up, make sure everything's squared away. And now I've got these bunny ears, or these loops. So now what I've got are two distinct anchor points. One thing that you really want to be careful of with this double threaded or double figure-8 on a Bight is that you never clip into a single ear. So meaning if I had two, let's say these were on webbing and there were two webbing anchors that were coming off here and I was clipping into these, first off, I would never want to just clip into this side and have all the weight on this one ear, because if this slips, it could actually melt the rope under the friction of the slipping. So that's definitely a no-no when you're hooking that up. So again, you've got these two fixed loops now for anchoring, but what you can do is actually adjust them. So if you're familiar with climbing and equalizing anchors, you can actually adjust this rope now and make one of these longer depending on where your anchors sit relative to where you're hooking up to climb. All right, so one last thing on the double figure-8 on a Bight is that it's actually easier to untie this than some of the other variations of figure-8 knots. It hasn't been my experience that figure-8s are necessarily difficult to untie, but they can become a little more difficult when under heavy load. So hope you enjoyed the figure-8 and a couple of different variations. Thanks for watching the ITS Knot of the Week. Be sure to check out itstactical.com to learn more, or click the description below to get a direct link to the site.